Hello, everyone. Hello, so happy to see you all. And welcome to this year's OU Creative Writing Program's Faculty Alum Reading. And we are wrapping up a year celebrating our 10th anniversary in the Creative Writing Program. So yay, creative writing. We are just so lucky to have such amazing students, such amazing faculty. We are always so excited to watch our students go out into the world and publish and take their love for the written word into their careers, whatever they may be. The Oakland Arts Review has been an amazing part of that experience for students here, as many of you know. So we're just so happy to get together and celebrate and hear from one of our very most beloved instructors tonight, Peter Markus, and two of our recent alums, James Braun and Suzanne Honda. Peter's, as we'll hear about, Peter's first collection of poetry just came out last fall, When Our Fathers Returned to Us as Birds. To rave reviews. So there will be books for sale in the back. So please do, there will also be a Q&A following the reading, as well as an opportunity to ask Peter to sign your book. So please take advantage of that. Hello to our Zoom crowd. We also have a Zoom crowd going on. And we will also open it up, Zoom crowd, to Q&A at the end. So if you want to save your questions for the end, you're very welcome. I still have my mask on. I can probably take it off. Hi. Hi. Hello. And we can take your questions at the end over chat, as well as obviously from you all. I want to thank the English department and the Creative Writing Program for all of your continued support. I want to thank Dean Carey and Associate Dean Joe Shively for everything you do for the College of Arts and Sciences. I want to thank President Peskovitz for her support of the humanities here at Oakland University. And with all this thank you and love in the air, I'm going to turn things over to our Creative Writing Program Director, Jeff Chapman.
Hi, everyone. What a wonderful, wonderful turnout. This is more people here than for Matt Bell, which isn't really surprising because I think everyone knows how wonderful Peter is and how exciting it is to have our graduates back. What a better way to celebrate, what a great way to celebrate 10 years of the program than to welcome back some people who have gone through the program and people who are sort of doing what those of you who are now students will be doing soon. And likewise, pretty soon, we're gonna be back there buying Suzanne and James's books and having them sign it. So I'm gonna tell, I had to do this. I have to tell a quick story. And Peter knew this when I walked in carrying this book. He's probably tired of this story because I've told it, I think about 1 million times now. I'm not tired of it yet, so I keep telling it. Back in 1993, I was in, who has taken creative writing 2100? Right, so that class, our intro creative writing class, many of you have taken with Peter. When I was at the University of Utah, whatever that class was, English something. I was taking that as a freshman in 1993. And our teacher had us buy this literary magazine. It's a weird little quirky literary magazine put out at the time by Gordon Lish. It doesn't exist anymore. Gordon Lish was sort of famous for being involved in the career of Raymond Carver. But he had this journal, and we read it, and I read this strange little story. It's a one-page story called "I Have a Stapler." Literally, and I'm not gonna. I flirted with the idea of just reading it quickly so you could hear it. But for the sake of time, just suffice it to say it's a one-page story about a stapler, about a guy who has a stapler, and that's it. And you would think, so what, right? But so what? It's like literally nothing happened. This guy has a stapler. He wants to staple some things. His friend had some things. He staples them. But at the time, something about the story hit. I loved this story at the time. I love this story now. It lodged itself in my brain and actually probably has influenced my writing as much as almost any story, like top 5 stories in terms of influence, the cadences of the story. So, but I thought I owned this story. Like no one else has read this weird little 1-page story in this weird journal that no longer exists. So I'm here many years later at Oakland, and I go to teach my class, and I photocopy this 1 page and hand it out and say, okay, bear with me. I'm going to have you read this weird story about a stapler. And my students look at it and they're like, oh yeah, we know this. I said, no, you don't. No one knows this story. And they're like, no, we've read this. Oh yeah, we recognize this. I said, how could you possibly know this? Like, it's not a story that gets made into movies. I should. They said, oh yeah, Peter Markus gave us that to read last semester. And it blew my mind at the moment because in the United States, no, in the world, there are probably 2 people who have fallen in love with this story enough that they photocopy it and hand it out to their students and say, this is a story you have to read. And I mean, the testament to like my passion for it is my students had this story printed on a mug. For if that's how small of a story it is. And probably 2 people in the entire world who have this feeling about this story. And we're both here. And before I ever really knew Peter, I heard that and I thought, this is someone who clearly has impeccable taste, but like loves something like I love that thing. Loves a story that like I love that story. And actually, while it could just be sort of a funny little story, what it really points to, like this journal actually holds, I think, a important place in American literature, an undervalued place in American literature. There's a bunch of people who published in here are really important in a way that we don't yet fully recognize. They're sort of like the next wave of postmodernists that came after Coover and Bartleby and Cheever. And they're really important. And Peter Markus is one of those people. What you like, if you read this journal and you read some of these authors, and then you pick up, say, We Make Mud, and you read a paragraph, any paragraph would probably do, but I've chose The Sky at the Bottom of the River. It starts out, there are people here in this town, in this dirty river town with this dirty river running through it, who will be quick to tell you that what happened to our father when he walked out into the river was that he, our father, in the river drowned. But us brothers, we are here to tell you this, that our father, when he walked out into the river, no, our father, he did not die. He lived is what our father did. Do you hear that repetition, the river, father? It's an attention to language, playfulness, like the poetry of language, even in stories, that this whole generation of authors got interested in. The play of language without the sort of weighty pomposity of some of the post-structuralists. It's such a wonderful thing. And like I said, undervalued. And we are here with Peter, who is this amazing writer and icon, part of this tradition, and who loves this story about I have a stapler. I will tell it until I die. I love it, Peter. I apologize, but please welcome.
What Jeff's leaving out of the story, that's the genius, or I guess the plot point of the story, is that the guy runs out of staples, right? And then he's faced with this existential crisis of like, where am I going to get more staples to staple these things for my friend? And and the thing is, he's got a box of staples, but he questions whether or not that box is filled with staples, right? And so there's this moment of climax where, it really gets like within a page, it's like, okay, this is like the dramatic crisis of this man's life, this young man's life. And then he opens up the box and it's filled with staples, right? There's more staples than he'd ever be able to use in all of his whole life. He filled the stapler, is how the story ends. Like, now I'll just fill in anecdotally what haunts me about that story and has haunted me when I was a young writer, probably James's age, when I was wandering around Ann Arbor at the time when that story came out, and going into the Shaman Drum booksellers and finding this issue of the Quarterly, and reading it, as I always did, the cheap young post-undergrad college kid that I was, just reading it while like squatting in the shelves and like just sort of, what was that? And not knowing really what to do with it, right? And yet leaving the books shop and carrying that story with me, in the way that one of my students this term talks about, what does she look for in a poem? Something that I can carry with me when I leave the poem, which is beautifully said. So in this Quarterly came out quarterly. It came out every 3 months, and every 3 months I would be back in Shaman Drum, picking up the new issue and pretty much reading through it. What haunted me and maybe just then hit me about that story is as a kind of a little editorial kind of, how Lish would put in these he'd slide in little secret notes into this journal, which was just part of his master trickery. And he would talk about awards that some of the writers that you're celebrating were just then winning the, Penn Faulkner Award, Mark Richard, The Ice at the Bottom of the World. And there was a little note about, Dom Leone. You haven't even told them this name. Dom Leone, Leone. He was a writer from New Hampshire, brother to Dan Leone, who was also a writer in that from that school. And there's a little note about like R.I.P. Dom Leone, who left this world at age 27. And I was like, oh my God, that's what that was his death story, right? He'll never live long enough to fill all those, right? So I was like, I didn't know what to do at that point. I probably just wandered around the city and was like, that's what a story can do, And I think that really made me more of a writer than I was at the time. And I was nothing of the writer that young James Braun is, that you're going to hear from, or Suzanne Honda. I was bad. I was that writer who maybe wanted it, but didn't know what to do with that want. And the two young writers that I've invited to read with me, as you're about to see, they're light years, not just above other students who, and I'm not throwing shade at students who are here, because I love them all, but like, you guys are all light years above where I was when I was 21, 22, 20, even into graduate school. It's embarrassing, but it's also humbling for me to be able to tell you this, that if I can do this, right? If I can stand here in a university and have this nice gathering and Jeff saying nice things about my work, like anyone can do it, right? And I tell that to my students, and there's a lot of truth to that story. So I'm just so happy to have James and Suzanne here. I'm gonna get these two writers are the real deal. Like, we teach for every student, and then there's students who come along and you're like, okay, they're gonna eclipse me soon, right? Which is what every teacher wants, whether or not it's Peter Markus or Gordon Lish, right? You want the best for your students. And, James Braun, I walked into, how many of you are in my 2100 class right now? Raise your hand. There's a handful that are in my current, some of you who've been through that system. I walk into that classroom not knowing what to ever expect. I walk in and I see this kid with a stack of books. Honest, you don't see that very often, right? With not books that you've ordered for your class, but Dennis Johnson's Jesus' Son. I was like, you reading that, son? Right? Yeah. Mark Richard at The Ice at the Bottom of the World. These are books not everybody teaches, let alone is all that familiar with. I can't remember the other title. Those are the two books that stand out with James. And James has now gone through our program, probably won every student award that you can. He's now at the University of Illinois and will soon be at the very esteemed Iowa Writers Workshop in the fall, and he got there because he's worked harder than any writer that I've ever seen or met in my life.
That's so true.
I mean, I don't know of anyone who's more driven than this kid, and who just wants it and eats it and reads voraciously and just, I don't know what you fed him up in Port Huron, but whatever you guys did, it's like everyone, yeah, so, and there's a flip side to that James, where's James? Well, he's got his nose in a book or in the nose of his own pages, but delighted that he's here. Delighted that Suzanne Honda is here, who was a student before James. I have vivid memories of Suzanne knocking on the classroom door, I think maybe a couple days into the semester, saying, Professor Gilson said that I should take your class. Is that good? Is that okay? And I was like, sure, you seem nice enough. Like, come on in, everybody's welcome. And then again, a writer that just quickly just sort of jumps into the occasion and writes stuff that shouldn't be written by someone in an introductory creative writing class. And then, the good thing about that, these students, as unparalleled as they are, I could point to some of my students that I'm lucky enough to be teaching this term, who are also doing exactly what James and Suzanne are doing. So, Suzanne has a book of poems coming out. I'm not sure when, soon. And I've been lucky enough to see those early pages, and she trusts me enough to allow me to circle things and tell her how great she is. And I've had equal pleasure with James's pages, and I just can't wait for them to stand in front of you to share their work with you today. And then at some point I'll come back up here and weep a little bit and talk a little bit about my own work. But I really value this opportunity to just be here with them, especially, and with all my fine colleagues in the creative writing department who find ways to keep me around, and everyone else at the university who's always just been so warm and loving to me. James, you're going to read first. All right, welcome James Braun.
Thank you, Peter. That was absolutely wonderful. And it's good to be back. Absolutely. So what I have for you today is it's an excerpt from a short story I wrote some time ago, a story written under the wing of Peter and Peter's teachings. But first to OU's English department and faculty, Annie Gilson, Susan, Allison, Katie, Kathy, Peter, Jeff, among many others. Thank you guys very much for all that you do. You are all truly the best of the best and the best at what you do. And of course, a million thank yous to Peter for all he's done for me and so many others. His teachings will stay with me and always remain manifest in my work. To find the words to make our own, to listen and pay attention, as he likes to say. May we all be so lucky to have a teacher like Peter, to be reminded of the rivers inside us that we have yet to name. And yes to his inviting us back here today, a true testament to how much he truly cares for his students. So let's get into the story. This one is called What the River Gives Back to Us. It rotates between two voices throughout, so I hope that won't be a huge cause for confusion. And we won't be able to get through all of it, but we'll do what we can, I suppose. So here we go. What the river gives back to us. We run through the pines of Gardens Hill Cemetery, past the statue of the child holding a lantern at the gate. We run by way of the shoreline, over the guardrail and down by the seawall, where the river walk of Elmer's Landing begins, to Mr. Sturgeon's hook and bait shop that rests on the roped together pilings of the fuel dock station. The entrance bell rings above us as Sis and I head inside the bait shop, the sound not even waking our father's friend Diver, who sits asleep in a folding chair behind the counter. While Diver sleeps, we buy an RC Cola from the soda machine with our put together pocket change, then leave for the railway bridge that juts out over the green watered canal. At the railway bridge, we sit in the cradle the railway ties make to watch the river in the coming dark. Back and forth between us, we pass the cola, looking out at the gas flares of oil refineries in Canada and what remains of the fishermen fishing into the night. In the coming dark, they motor down the canal to the boat launch to hook their boats onto trailers, returning to shore for home until there's only one fisherman left, the red light of our father's boats, shining like a lighthouse in the middle of the river. On the river that divides one country and another, you will find a man on a boat fishing this river. This man, a father whose children wait on shore and hope of his someday return. When each day he sees his son and daughter resting on the railway ties no train has run on for years, see how in their watching they call out to him, "Father, come home." Last week, our father drove us to our town's funeral home for our mother's evening service. Besides the three of us and Diver, nobody showed up. Not our mother's co-workers from the hospital she used to work at in town. None of our father's friends, but blind Diver from Mr. Sturgeon's hook and bait shop. Diver wore a pin on his lapel of a pink ribbon. He and our father sat beside each other in a row of empty chairs, sipping styrofoam cups of coffee and speaking not at all as they watched the photograph slideshow of our mother on the box TV. Sis and I stood around, not knowing what else to do. Usually we would go at it with cat's cradle or fingers laced through the strings until one of us would mess up. But Sis kept the string in her pocket until after the service ended. After the service, the four of us and two men who worked at the funeral home carried our mother outside, sliding her casket into the back of a hearse idling in the parking lots. We four piled into our father's truck and drove ahead to Gardens Hill, where, at the gate, the statue of the child stood holding the lantern. We carried our mother through the pines to her gravesite where a priest read a service. We placed plastic flowers atop of the casket. Plastic flowers, our mother's favorite kind of flower. The casket then lowered by straps into a hole dug out of the ground that we then filled. Afterwards, Diver told us he would find his own way home. Our father stayed kneeling over the gravesite while Sis and I waited in the truck. Late that night, when we got back to the river house, the first thing our father did was open the garage, hitch his boat on the ball mount of his truck, and drive off, still wearing the button-down shirt and tie he wore to our mother's funeral, our father heading for the river where he's been ever since. See the father on the river he fishes, and the tattoo on his hand of a fish named Ichthys. At night he breathes a breath into his hands he tries to warm. Inside them his words to the river. The prayers he says into the hands he warms, worn and calloused by gills and fish hooks. Hands that once held his wife's on the last stage of the cancer that lived in her breast. The prayers that say, give me an end, Lord, an end to all this. We wait each day for our father to return to us. For our father stays out in his boat, not coming in even to eat. The way Sis and I figure it's, he'll have to stop in for fuel at some points. So we hang around most days at Mr. Sturgeon's hook and bait shop, waiting for him to pull alongside the gas dock to fuel up. One morning we find Divers sleeping on a pallet in the loading bay behind the bait shop. Divers taken to sleeping more ever since last winter, when he drank too much whiskey and fell asleep with his back to the ice, his face turned up to the sky. As a joke, the shanty living men of our town placed 2 crackers over his eyes like they were preparing him for a burial at sea. Diver was so passed out drunk he didn't wake when the seagulls came and pecked out his eyes. When he woke, the world remained dark, and he couldn't tell right then whether or not he was still dreaming. Sis and I think Diver sleeps so much because he wants to stay not knowing if the darkness he's living in is real, wanting to hold back the idea of his blindness. When we kick Diver awake and ask him, has our father come in? Diver rubs the crust of sand from the corners of his sockets. No, he says, sorry, I haven't seen him. Diver says he thinks our father's been getting his gas elsewhere, maybe on the canal downriver, or he's not getting any gas at all, but just using his trolling motor to keep him steady where he's at. I'm sorry, he says. I'll let you know if I see him. When he dreams of his children he sees on the shoreline of where he lived as a boy, the land he met the girl on. Dreams of their hands as strings between them before pulling away. One of them lost, either one, each the same. Often he does not dream in the absence of sleep, but when he dreams, it is of this he dreams, his only dream. Sis says she worries our father won't return to us before winter hits. It was late August when we buried our mother in Gardens Hill, and now in November we're waiting for the first snowfall of the year. Sis says she wonders what our father will do when the river begins to freeze over, if he'll come home or allow his boat to freeze into the river's ice. I don't know, I tell her, and by accident I turn our cat's cradle into 2 crowns. He leaves in the dark when his children sleep in the house on the river he left them to live inside of together, to live alone together. He ties his boat to a cleat of a stranger's dock and walks the roadside in a suit in the cold. His eyes on the lights left on in houses along the river, the dumpster behind the florist shop where he knows he can find the cracked plastic flowers the woman who works there throws out, the cemetery where he places them on the stone in the constant dark. Most nights we know our father by the red light his boat gives off, but during the day he could be any fisherman on the river. Most often, Sis and I know him in the hour before dark, when all the fishermen have come in and our father is the only fisherman left. Sis and I watching him pull in his lines by hand. Our father some days fishing among whitecaps, us worried they will capsize his small metal boat. Some nights we don't see our father's light at all. Only when we visit our mother's grave, running through the pines for a place in the ground, do we know he's been here, a bundle of broken flowers placed at the base of the stone. And so you are the one who wonders, what voice is this behind the voice? The voice that follows and gives speech to this man, the father, on his boat on the river. The voice that is the other. That at night the father watches the gas flares in another country as if listening for it, but not hearing anything but his breath and the current beneath him and the birds that live in the sky. When the river freezes over, the fishermen of our town go out on the ice to fish. Sis and I watch them from the railway bridge. Most are set up off where the canal spills out near Elmer's Landing, bundled up figures breathing a cold smoke as they drill into the ice. They set up their shanties against the wind and let their baits down into the river. Sis and I return to our riverside house to see if our father's there, if his boat is in the garage. Sis opens the side door with a key she takes from a tin can beneath the porch. In the dark of the garage, we see the outline of our father's boat with a blue tarp thrown over it. But when we look through our frozen house, our father isn't anywhere. Sis says, I think I know where he's gone, and I follow her back to the garage where we look up into the rafters, our father's ice fishing shanty missing from the place it used to hang. He returns to leave again for where they will not find him. The hauling of his boat onto a trailer, the putting away and the taking out. Once more back to the river on the ice he will live on and fish all winter. To the city of ice shanties where he will be lost in the cold silence. All of this done in the dark on a night he cannot dream his dreams inside. Thank you.
Did I give you a proper introduction?
I mean, I'm fine, it's up to you.
We good?
Okay. Could you speak up a little bit? Because it's a little loud.
Sure, sure. Oh dear, I'm stuck on my earring. Okay, we'll just do this side, maybe. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Suzanne. James, that was beautiful. That was just, wow. The cadences and the repetition, and it was just, oh, I felt like I was right there with the water and the boats, and thank you. That was beautiful. Thank you to the creative writing department at OU for inviting me back, and to Peter for inviting me. I'd like to add to the anecdote that it was the last day to transfer classes, and Annie was like, you have 5 minutes. If you can get there and he's still there, you can take his class. So I ran across campus from her office to South Foundation, which I don't know if it's still open or if it's being renovated or what's happening, but was panting out of breath on like the 3rd story and opened the door. It wasn't quite as graceful. At least I don't remember it being as graceful. I remember opening the door and being like, do you have room in this class? To which Peter said yes. And the rest is a lovely history. I had a wonderful time at Oakland. I did not know if I wanted to continue writing, and they gave me a chance. The girl who everyone said was weird for loving The Sound and the Fury and thinking it was the best thing ever written, and everybody else was like, that's the worst book ever. It doesn't make any sense. So, and then I found Peter, who was like, that is the best book ever. So, yeah. So this is a chapbook titled When We Were Birds. It will be released later in 2022. I wish I had a date. I do not have an official date yet. But this one is in memory of my friend who I made here, who was one of the best parts of OU as well. So this is When We Were Birds. We wanted everything. Fingers, a fingernail, palm or fist driving a stick into the earth, marking a pit or grave. A garter snake, a field of grass sun-bleached in a summer without rain. Blue feather in an owl's beak, her wind-bent wing. Dead on the side of the road, bird singing high, unseen. Talons, beak. To wake up with a song sung without teeth. A language of our own, and a fishbone currency. A garden overgrown with mint and yarrow, lavender and peony. Gods, mothers, moons. To make good of wind, wrought quiet under weeds. Before birds came bodies, were feathers, gray, brown, green, a heron, a blue jay. What moved inside our mothers were wings, milk blue, collision of sky and wave. The earth disintegrates. Mute honeybees make fragrant flames. Where the lake drifts in seams of milk blue blossoms, milk white waves. where a starry comb of honey bears a girl born mourning the memory of lilies, where bleak moons sing thoughtless in praise, bird girls cry, am I dying? Stars split mother. Listen. An empty womb is still ajar, and stillborns, born still, are still born in praise of this mother-daughter ache. Where there is death, there is dirt. Now, let burst forth wings. Only bird girl remains. What is bird but girl, but moon, but bead, water, body, wing, a jar of earth or clay, a fish with a feather blossoming out of its beak. Perhaps she is grass, a branch, heavy, a mouthful of stars or lace, smoke as it coils over wood, a mother in loose curls, hydrangeas singing blue over soft graves. Say it. Say it louder. Say it with mouth closed and tongue pressed pink against white teeth. Say it again. Bird is girl, is light. Say girl is sky where wind greets day and lake unveils a blue, blue face, where moons and waves alluviate. Here, starlight is split-knuckled, a murmur of honeysuckle, and girls are birds, are girls. Tell us to swallow fish, eat beads. We paper cranes, mother of bee moon singed. Bird girls dissipate. Where fish spin in mirrored starlight and waves on the shore fray, we string feathers among blue beads. We bird girls swallow honey, tongue bees. Listen, humming. Morning birds moon, murmurs lake. Bird girls a cacophony of ash and dust and cranes. We cathedral the sky with wings, make ornaments of fish in trees. Speak. The nature of girl is bird. The nature of girl is bead. Listen. The body is a window where we live. There is no tomorrow. We eat stars. Our bodies fish drunk waves. We were fathered in this lake, born in a jar, born a bead, blue, a moon blur of aquamarine. Our hands make wings. We brush moonlight, sip milk blue silence. Wait. The moon gives birth to morning. There are birds and there are girls. Girls are birds, bird girls. We blur the sky. Our ashes blossom cranes. We spoon starlight. Our bodies dreams of snapdragon and milkweed and sage. In the beginning was the water, and the water beginning. Mother, a moon, a splinter of blue, a split bird, bird girl and girl bird, birthed in water, a lily blooms. Waning moon, lonely God, sing birds into this day. Circle paradise with a memory of light, where mother is milk blue and daughter is lily, is crane. Let now the ethereal crest of heron and egret constellate. Let bird girl blossom and sky bloom. Empty water, empty womb. Let now the drowned become the drowning. And Ouroboros of sun, bird, sun, moon. To gut a fish, grow talons. Break its body with your beak. String its scales in a tree, tongue morning. Where sunlight snags, wind a rosary of blue beads. Speak only of Mary, mother of lilies. Sprout wings. There is no tomorrow, only this. Mary, our mother of bodies, fragile under weeds. To all things come lilacs, delicate spires of pink, soft burst of spring. Clouds blossom mothers, day flees. Bird girl is a fish in a fist, and mother is a mouth in which we smolder, lily white and singing. There is only today. Here, the fern raises her tender spine to the sky in supplication of Mary, our mother of grief, whose waterless womb molds jars of clay, virgin brimming. We the bees see our translucent wings. Bird girls in birch trees cluster over foxgloves, whose bell mouths speckle white and blossom delicate over yarrow and fragrant curry. Yes, here where mint in her violet fury devours sunlight and earth, and milkweed balances soft monarchs, where finches flit and sparrows parse pine needles, here where summer bolts marigold and Queen Anne's lace sing in praise of this water, colt born free, canal widening where fish swim upstream against weeds. Here, let bird girls open petaled throats and chickadees sing. Let now dusk settle, where silos stand quiet past copes of birch, and fox in her fox den sleeps. Where there is death, there is dirt. Where there is mother, lake. We breach the sky in shreds of breath. Let now the dead recommence their dying. Let now the earth reclaim her silence. We bird, sacrifice of blue made to white waves. We follow moon. Here, the wind fractures spines of cedar and beech, and 1,000 birds burst into berries. Sky blurs peach. Death is a flock of honeybees, less their queen. We are moth-lit wildings, what passes between. Mother, a coil of smoke bent. And sorrow is a wind, grass, wind dance, frequented by geese. Oh, how hollow their grief, their dark bodies, an alluvium of wings. Thank you.
Suzanne, I think you put a spell on me a little bit. I feel like I need to go parse some pine needles with sparrows right now. Thank you for that beautiful incantatory, which is a word in my introduction for Peter, but incantatory reading. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for the music and the lights and the praise of that. Transformative, really. Oh my. Well, thank you so much, James. Thank you so much, Suzanne. And now we've come to the part where I am so happy to introduce Peter to come up and read for us now. As everyone has said and knows, we are so incredibly lucky to have Peter Markus here at OU. He has inspired, enriched, and supported countless students and their work, from first drafts and in-class writings to pieces recently published in literary journals or as full-length collections. Your work spans so much, Peter. What I most admire about Peter's teaching is how he can infuse students with reverence for words, for the solidity, the musicality, and density of language itself. This reverence contains a hope that words, particularly certain words which are dear to us, and which Peter asks his students to say, what words are your words? But that those words, which for Peter have been words like fish, mud, brother, river, that they hold a certain key to our existence, to our relationship to the world, to uncovering things that have been shrouded from us, whether that's just by becoming adults or living in an industrial world, or living in a world where we encounter numbness to words every day. Peter's teaching can strip that away and make them glittering and unveiling. A writer friend of mine used to keep posted on his wall a translation from Ecclesiastes, which reads the question, "That which is far off and deep, who can find it out?" That's a Peter Markus question. And I think, and Peter's answer to his students to that question is, you can go find that out. And his work also makes those same discoveries. I was so excited to read When Our Fathers Return to Us as Birds, which, we know a lot of Peter Markus's work as a fiction writer, and this is just so exciting to see the concerns with language and his musicality transformed into his debut poetry collection, which contains returns to the river, returns to the water of meditation and familial time, returns to the moments rendered tender and eternal of his father's death. We read poems from this amazing collection in my poetry workshop, and it was really moving to see students who have studied with Peter use the gifts he's given them as writers and as readers to encounter his work. So we discussed how the words in this collection, river, father, wings, bird, dark, bring us again and again through the process of grief, but it becomes renewed, darkened, brightened, so that the book possesses this unique intensity, which is both urgent and sort of glacial at once. I want to quote a couple of things that students have said. Renee Saladotis wrote, speaking of the poem, Everything Where I Have Left It. And this poem begins with the question, what is so different about this house when it is dark? It's a beautiful question. And Renee wrote that this poem creates a stringent, terse, yet gentle tone, reflective of the darkened house and its reliable contents. And I just love that phrase so much, stringent, terse, yet gentle. And I feel like that exemplifies a lot of what you're about to hear when Peter reads from it. Melina Caldwell wrote about the last poem in the collection, briefly, It Might Have Even Flown. And she notes how the collection gives no answers. Like the process of grief, the ending is not definitive. It cannot offer the consolation the speaker or the reader desire. But I would say that it's this articulation Peter gives us of these longings, grounded in the riverscape the poems give us intimately, that does offer poetry's unique consolation, which is fleeting and present, far off and deep, and also in our hands. For the official part of the introduction, Peter Markus's first book of poems was published in November 2021. He's also the author of 6 books of fiction, among them the novel Bob, or Man on Boat, as well as the collections The Fish and the Not Fish, We Make Mud, and Good Brother. He's also the author of a book of nonfiction, Inside My Pencil, a memoir about the teaching Markus has done for the past 26 years with Inside Out Literary Arts in Detroit. He lives in Michigan, obviously, where he teaches at Oakland University, lucky for us, and is the senior writer at Inside Out. Please welcome Peter Markus.
What would be really instructive? How old are you, James?
24.
And how old are you?
28.
Oh, you're older. All right. So, but I mean, even so, I should have brought in work that I was writing when I was 24 and when I was 28 to read, and just you'd be like, he was bad. Like his students learned, but somehow they learned, I don't know, but I think maybe I hopefully have gotten better. And I think if I've gotten better as a writer, it's maybe because I've just listened to myself teach. And that's sort of when I'm telling my students to find words that they revere. That's something that I've had to remind myself when I tell them to pay attention. I don't think I would have written this book here had I not paid attention and made use of the things around you. It's interesting, like, you know, you see a lot of the words in James's lexicon and Suzanne's even that you'll hear in mine. And it's sort of like, what's that famous thing about when you meet the Buddha on the middle of the road, you know, kill him, right? And I really feel like that's something that I encourage my students to do. It's like, yeah, take words from me and make them your own. And they certainly have, whether or not it's Suzanne's sort of mythical bird girl or James's rendering of diver and what's the bait shop? I mean, what a cool place, you know, and he's writing about the upper St. Clair River, which I, you know, have not spent any time at except in James's fiction. You'll be hearing about a different river that's south of Detroit. That is a river that I hope still belongs to me. But you've got these young writers saying, not so fast, buddy. And they grab you by the ankle and grab you by the tongue. And they're like, okay, I'm going to make from those words too. And then other words. So, but it challenges me to keep trying to find new words too, which is always the battle of any writer. So what I thought would be really sort of, I think, instructive is not for me just to read from this book, this new book, which it's a really sad book. So, and it's hard for me to read through it, as you'll see, and I will read a couple poems from it. But I wanted to go back in time, you know, to when I first started finding the words that were mine, and words like mud. I think Jeff and Katie mentioned brother and river. But also just to sort of point out, when I'm holding all these books, all the books and the stories that you don't see, that never make it into these books. Like the book that Jeff was holding up, and he read a couple sentences from We Make Mud. This is a book of 53 stories. I spent a decade of my life writing about these two brothers who live in a dirty river town, until one day their father comes home and he sort of like puts up the house for sale, you know, because it's a shit town. It's, you know, there's this, the steel mill shuts down, and what are you going to do except, you know, get out of Dodge? But they want to, as an act of sort of childhood rebellion or mischief or devotion to landscape, they choose to dig in and make mud and make magic out of mud and to make mischief out of mud. So I thought it would be kind of interesting. Just this will help me get to this book, is if I read some of these very short stories. So I'm gonna read two stories from these early books, or these first books that I feel are very much me. You know, oh, he's that guy who writes about mud and the two brothers and the fish. You know, Dom Leone is the guy who wrote about the stapler. I wish he could have gone on to write about other things, but, you know, things happen. And then I'll sort of build a little bit toward this book. But really the thing that I want all the young writers to hear me say in this room is, again, 53 stories, 16 stories, and I think maybe 26 stories. These are all about these two characters that I lived with obsessively for, like I said, a decade of my life, from about 1998 until about 2000 and maybe 10 or so. So maybe even more than 10 years if I'm doing the math correctly. The book came out, I think, in 2011. But in my basement somewhere, there's, let's see, what's 53, 16, 26. Jeff Thomas, do the math for me. Less than 100, right? Somewhere in a folder, in a drawer, there's another 150 stories that'll never see the light of day, at least in book form, right? And I think that we all need to hear that and to honor that. And I say that with sort of a grin on my face, you know. As a fisherman, you don't you don't take every fish home and eat it, right, James? So you throw things back. So let me read a little, probably one of the shortest stories in this book is called The Moon is a Fish Eye. Let us, brothers, tell you this, that if you have never lived to look a fish up close into its eye, then you have never before lived. A fish's eye, when you look up into it, eye to eye, you will see that this eye, it really isn't an eye at all. What it is, a fish eye is, it's a moon. The first time that us brothers came to see this, we were just a couple of boys getting ready to chop the head off of a fish. I held onto that fish. I held that fish's head down. Brother was the brother of us brothers who took his fish cutting knife, and with this knife that we used to chop off the heads off of our fish and to gut the guts out of our fish, brother took his knife and he stuck this knife into this fish's eye. When brother did this with his knife, when he stuck the tip of his knife into this fish's eye, this fish eye, are you picturing this with us? This fish's eye in front of our own eyes, it shattered into 1 billion pieces. Each broken piece became a star. So there's these two brothers. They make mud, they make mischief, they make magic, they make a playmate that they name Girl. They learn to walk on water. They fish. They crucify each other to this pole in the backyard that's studded with the chopped off heads of fish. They do what they can to save themselves and to save the town that they love through them. And there's another character in this collection whose name is Boy. And I just want to read this very short piece. And again, it's to teach more than anything else. And I've got a little anecdote that I want to follow up this story with about one of my former students, not here at Oakland, but in the work that I do in the Detroit Public Schools. And that student, Michael Jackson, no relation to the moonwalker, has gone off to win a Pulitzer Prize. Boy. We knew this other boy in town who was brother to nobody, an only child with only a mother and a father and no brother to call his own. So we took him in as brother. We did not call him brother, though. We called him Boy. Boy was littler than us brothers. Boy was born years, no, centuries after we were born. We were down by the river with our fishing man father the day that this boy was born into this world. This boy, this brother, we were told, was born with teeth and a full head of hair. What he was not born with, we discovered, was a tongue. This boy's mouth was a hole in his face he fed food into. Once in a while, we might hear some mouthy sounds come grunting out, but for the most part, Boy was silent. Some of the time, we did not even know he was near us brothers. standing close by, his feet flopping inside his father's boots, buried knee-deep in the river's mud. At times, Boy was more dog than he was a boy. Boy was a dog who always came whenever we called, to do whatever we told. Us brothers taught Boy more than a few tricks. We taught Boy how to walk on water. It's true that Boy drowned the first time he walked out. Boy floated face down the river, but then he walked upriver back to us brothers. Good dog, we told Boy. We scratched Boy's back. We pulled a bone out from Boy's hand and tossed it to the river. Boy, we told Boy, go fish. Boy took to that muddy river water like he was part dog, part fish. Then Boy swam back to the river's muddied bank and flopped down on the muddy shore. Yes, just like a fish. This boy here is a keeper, brother said. If you say so, I said to brother, and then we chopped off this boy's head. The anecdote I want to share with you is that when I read that story up at a young writers conference that I used to teach at up at Higgins Lake, there was some people gathered just like you all are gathered here. And Michael Jackson was one of them. And there was a young girl next to him. I don't remember her name. Maybe she hasn't won a Pulitzer yet. But when that action happens at the end and Boy's head gets chopped off, she gasped. You know, I've read that story in bars in Brooklyn, right? People laugh and they see the humor after a couple of drinks. But she gasped. She's like, oh, what just happened, right? And they were sitting right there where Jeff is, and Michael said, he goes, put his hand on her knee. I can still see it. Oh, don't worry, it's just a metaphor. And I said, what do you mean it's a metaphor? The moon is a fisheye. Now that's a metaphor, but that's an action and that's an image, right? That's not a metaphor. That happened, right? It's true, Boy grows a new head, right? And that I revisit that in a later story called Boy Revisited, but it's not a metaphor. It's an image. So there's those of you who like metaphors, think about that one. So when I was so deeply engaged and enriched and enmeshed in whatever the word might be with these brothers, in the best of ways, I was like, man, I don't think I'm ever going to be able to write anything except these stories about these two brothers, which was cool. I got 3 books out of it. And I was known as that guy who writes about brothers and fish and mud, right? But I was like, well, maybe there's something to that. Maybe, and these stories got really easy for me to write. I could just like I said, there's 150 others somewhere, right? So I was just pounding them out. But then I was like, well, maybe I need to put them, maybe I need to turn off the faucet. And so I was sort of thinking that. I remembered, again, vividly, writers have great memories sometimes, not for what I ate yesterday, but for when I wrote this next book that I want to talk about. I live way south of Detroit in a town called Trenton. So I drive every day into Detroit. I drive up 2 days a week up to Auburn Hills. I cross this big bridge over the Rouge River called the Rouge River Bridge. Good name, right? And it's sort of, those of you from Saginaw, it's like the Zilwaukee Bridge. I still, every day, I drove over it today, I'm shaking as I'm driving, right? And as you descend the south part of it, it's where my mom's family settled from Hungary. It's in a place called Del Rey. And I exit right off at that Dearborn exit, and where my grandparents lived, where my cousin still lives in the house that my grandfather pretty much built. And as I'm driving one day, all of a sudden I'm thinking I need to find maybe a different voice or a different character. And all of a sudden I heard a voice, and I'll just read you what I heard. In a boat on a river lived a man. Similar voice. I mean, there's still the river, there's still a boat. The brothers don't really have a boat. That comes up later. They find a boat in this book, actually, right? But I was like, in a boat on a river lived a man. I liked how that sounds. In a boat on a river lived a man. I'm like, all right, I think I got a story here, right? In a boat on a river. I probably chanted it. I do believe in the power of incantation, right? Why else would we have language other than to cast a spell? In a river on a boat lived a man. So I got something here, right? And then when I got the next sentence, the next paragraph, I said, I've got a book. I don't even need my glasses. Bob. Just one word, one sentence, one paragraph. And I was like, that's a book. Ba-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. 6 weeks it took me to write this book, right? Deep into the 6 weeks, the brothers make a cameo, of course. They're like, you can't get rid of us that easy. They find this boat that's washed up on their river shore. That's called the Dead Man's Boat, which is, there's a story called the Dead Man's Boat. And then there's a dead man who got separated from his boat, and they sort of insisted that they play their small part in this book. But I thought I'd read a little bit from this book, just because I love this book. It's a really sweet book. It's maybe me at my most tender and maybe not sentimental, but it's a sweet book. And I don't think there's any of this book for sale, but I've got some in my backpack that I'm going to give out to people who ask me really nice questions or say, boy, those were nice stories that you read. So I'm just going to read a little bit from this book. And it's basically a retelling of The Old Man and the Sea, which is a book that I love and reread every year. In a boat on a river lived a man, Bob. Bob fished. It's what Bob did all the time. Fish and fish. Sometimes Bob ate the fish, but most of the time what Bob did with the fish was Bob sold the fish. It's how Bob lived: a boat, a river, fish, a man, Bob. Look at Bob's hands. His knuckles are rivers. The skin on Bob's hands, fish scale covered. They look like they've been dipped in stars. Just gonna jump around a little bit. Sometimes at night, when the fish are slow to bite, Bob looks up from the river and looks up into the sky for stars. Some nights, Bob sees how many stars in the sky he can count. One night, Bob counted up to 222. That was a bad night for fishing. That was a good night for counting stars. Most nights, the fish start biting before Bob can count up to 10. On a good night of fishing, on a bad night for counting stars, Bob can fill up his boat with more fish than there are stars up in the sky. Nights like this, Bob's boat is no longer just a boat. It is a constellation of fish. Sometimes when I watch Bob fish, I can't help but believe that Bob is older than the river is, that Bob is older than the moon is, that Bob made the moon so that at night he could better see the river, so that Bob could better see the fish. This is what a fish looks like to Bob when Bob looks down inside the river to see a fish. A fish is a flash of silvery light. A fish is a sliver of milky moonlight. A fish is a shooting star. Bob, make a wish. Get in the boat, fish, Bob says to the fish. In the boat, Bob whispers to the river. Like this, Bob wishes. Bob's boat, when Bob makes his wishes, His boat fills up with stars, with moon, with light. At night, there are other lights that light up the river. There is the light from the lighthouse light. There are lights from the houses with the people who live inside them. There are lights from factories along the river that haven't yet shut down. Nights when the moon is full, it is so lit up on the river that Bob in his boat looks like he is glowing from inside him, as if Bob is made out of light. But no, Bob is a man made out of flesh. Once, when I shook Bob's hand, there was bone there for me to shake. I'm Bob, I said, and I stuck out my hand for Bob to take it. It's true that Bob hesitated at first. Bob looked at my hand, but then he took it, my hand, the way that a fish might look at a rusty hook before taking it into its mouth. One thing I forgot to tell you is that the narrator is named Bob. Bob is named Bob. Bob, the narrator, has a son named Bob. And that the Bob that's fishing is the Bob who's telling about Bob who's fishing. That's his father. There are some river folks who know Bob, who say about Bob that what Bob is looking for is a stone that floats, a fish that doesn't exist. Or maybe what Bob is looking for is this, a fish that walks on water. What I say to this, what I say about Bob is this. Bob is Bob, I say. I also say this, that in Bob's eyes, in Bob's heart, there's a fish that is more than just a fish. There's no such fish that is just a fish. Every fish is a beautiful fish. Everything that is beautiful in this world is a fish. The moon is a fish. The river is a fish. The stars in the sky, the stones in the river, the mud on the river's bank. Fish, fish, fish. So I wrote that book in 6 weeks. Maybe you'd be like, no, you should have spent 7. Faulkner wrote As I Lay Dying in 6 weeks, or at least that's part of the myth. Jim Harrison is a writer that I admire, wrote his great novella, Legends of the Fall, in 9 days and changed 1 word along the way. I changed more words along the way. So my experiment failed is what I want to tell the young writers in this group. Like the boys, they come back, they make an appearance. I didn't read that part. So then I kept on, okay, you little buggers, you can come back. And I wrote and kept writing about them. And then I was like, but I'm going to have the upper hand. Hope this is interesting. So then I wrote this book called The Fish and the Not Fish. And maybe what makes this book different, or the book that it is that every word in this book is a monosyllabic word. So therefore, I could not use brother. I could not use river. And I could not use, well, those are the 2 main words I couldn't use, right? So I had to find a way to do something with that constraint. And interestingly enough, and I'm not going to read from this book because it's what I call my most unreadable book. And there's been a lot of people who've told me, yeah, this was a bad one. Bad one. I don't know what you were going for. But one thing I was going for is that I hope that there's still that cadence, that enchanting, incantatory spell that I think can happen with the single stringed guitar. There's still music here, I think. But it worked. The brothers, they shut off. And that was sort of a good thing in terms of me going on to maybe what this book then paved the way for, which I brought all these books with you know, this is a book of nonfiction. I never thought of myself as a nonfiction writer. I was always the fiction writer in my head, you know, and yet I'm teaching fiction, I'm teaching poetry, I'm teaching the intro to poetry and prose, and telling my students, you know, using Raymond Carver's advice, make use of the things around you, put it in, right? And I'm like, well, I've been driving into the hood for all these years and teaching the young writers of Detroit about the power of their pencil, right? Maybe there's a story there. I don't have to make stuff up all the time. So I wrote this book, and I don't know, kind of proud of this book. I'm not going to read from it either, but it's back there if anyone's interested. But it tells the story of that part of me that's, again, the teacher in me is so important to the writer in me, whether or not I'm teaching James and Suzanne, Lena, Faith, Emma, Jeff Thomas, Alyssa, see if I got all my, Milena, Renee, right? Like, you guys are important, but so are these little 9-year-olds in the city of Detroit, and they feed me words the same way that you all feed me words. And I wrote about that, so check it out. All right, I guess I'll read some poems, seeing that book is like sort of been like, you know, I think that's what you're here to do. So, and I guess all I want to say about, and I'll just read a handful and then we'll do some Q&A. This past Saturday would have been my dad's 90th birthday. What my father did not have to say. In his final days, my father did not speak because he could not speak. He did not ask how the car was running or about the kids or his granddog. He did not ask about work. He did not look out at the boats on the river to say, there goes a 32-footer, or the lines on that boat are really fine. He did not say the water was at its highest in 25 years. If his thin lips moved at all, it was only when I wiped them with a wet washcloth or put yogurt on a spoon up to them, hoping he would eat. He did not eat, and he did not speak, and soon his breathing slowed until there was nothing. He'd been slowly dying, and now he was dead. I did not know what to say, and so I said little out loud. I walked down to the river where I thought maybe I would find something there to tell me what I was supposed to do now. The loons sat on the water and dove under when a boat motored close by. They did not sing, not right then at least. Only later at night did they call out to each other, their voices crisscrossing the river in the April dark. Whatever words my father might speak now that he is dead are obvious. Look at those birds, he tells me, when the 10 swans beat their wings over my head on their way to somewhere else, even if it's just the other side of the river where there isn't so much ice. Pay attention, he says, when just before dark, the doe and her 2 fawns cross the road, stopping briefly to look at me as if to say, we see you. We know you live here too. When I go down to the river, when I walk through the trees, when I look at the sky, Father, 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 bird, bird, bird. One thing I wanted to say, and this kind of goes along with Suzanne's reading and her reclamation of the word bird. Mary Oliver says something, I'm going to butcher it, but all poems should have a bird in it. You should use that as an epigraph. And then Jim Harrison, who I mentioned, writing Legends of the Fall, in 9 days and changing only one word. Death steals everything except our stories. That one was called Look at Those Birds. The name of the father, the name of the fish. In the moments after my father died, I lathered up his face with soap to shave him. It was the very least that I could do after everything he had always done for us. My mother praised my tenderness, how close I was able to get under his nose and neck, those places where when he was alive, he would pull his face away and tell me to stop. Afterwards, I went down to the river to draw a glass of water from the river we both loved. I dipped my hands into the water to anoint him in the name of the Father and the fish. On his head, his hands, his feet, his belly, upon his heart, I made the sign of the cross, followed by a fish, next a crescent moon. I raised the glass of water, which sparkled. It was so clear and so clean, as was my father, as was the clarity that death brings. I'm going to read two more. Practice. How cruel that for the last years of his life he could not speak, could not get out of bed to walk himself to the bathroom, could not wipe his face clean, could not shave or shower or brush his teeth without the help of his wife or son. And let's not speak about the plastic bag fixed to the side of his bed or the rubber hose that ran to it, draining out what was in his bladder. The indignity of such reduction, the body as a vehicle of betrayal. This for a man who for 60 years rarely took even an aspirin, who never complained, never missed a single day of work. The doctors were only human and of little help. When he could speak, he often made the joke about the medical profession. That's why they call it practice. They never got it right. In the end, cause of death, malnutrition. He starved himself to death, the one thing he had control of. He turned his head away from the window with a view of his beloved river and went to sleep. Died on a Sunday, a beautiful sunny day, blue skies, loons on the river water that his son anointed his body with, clear enough to drink, the way it glistened in the glass. Everybody amazed at how clean it was, how transparent. Is Annie still here? We forgot to sing you happy birthday. This is for Annie. There is singing. The bird outside the window is made of ash. There is no going home. You are already there, sheltered from the wind. Somewhere there is singing. Elsewhere there is a song. That's the best birthday. Happy birthday. Sorry. I talked about the river that James owns and which flows into my river, man. Think about that. So I still own you for a little while. Skin of river and bone. This is not a river to wade out in. It is not a river to cross. The bottom, to begin with, is made of mostly mud. It's not uncommon to sink down in up to your knees. not a feeling you want to know, unless you have to fix a dock beam damaged by the breakup of ice. My father was the one who always took care of what was broken until he could no longer, and he handed that hammer down to me. His hands were big-knuckled and calloused when I was a boy. It wasn't until I saw them near the end, clutching the bedsheet, did I realize how small they'd become, how big mine had gotten, how I had to learn to hammer nails into wood, my own flesh tearing. I think I'm going to end there if that's all right with everybody. I guess we want to do a little Q&A. And like I said, I've got 5 copies of Bob or Man on Boat, not to take business away from the bookstore, and 5 copies of The Fish and the Not Fish that my publisher just, when a publisher remainders books, which means they're going to pulp them, they'll be like, hey, you want some books? And I'll be like, well, are they free? Sure, yeah. And they send you a big box of books. So this is sort of the bottom of that box. So I want to give you guys something tonight other than just words, more words, but books. So if you ask a good question, or if you say, that was not bad, you might get a free book tonight. Or a bad, maybe I should reward bad questions.
I'll stand next to it, open up the chat.
Okay,
so
yeah.
just take a peek. And also we have a Q&A to James.
Yeah, please, that would be,
So,
I think,
yeah.
maybe even best. Should they stand up here?
So would you like, yeah, James and Suzanne, come on up. Okay. So we have one in the chat. Do you want to start with that? Or you
I'd
wanna-
rather
let's
start with
the
these guys.
audience?
They're
Okay.
the one, they're here.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean?
And then let's see.
James's dad has a question.
Right.
Let's hear it from you.
So
Yeah.
losing a parent's very painful, and I started thumb through. I haven't read your poems yet, but I was looking through this one, the third from last. I started to read it. I can't finish.
Mm,
So as a writer, like that's very difficult memories. Generally, you try to think of happy times, right?
mhm.
What was your thought process on reliving in words what you had to go through with your father and why?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. It's funny because I don't think Annie Williams is here, but she's a student in our program. Is she here right now? She asked me that question. She was a student in my class last semester. So why are you not celebrating playing catch with your dad when you were 12 and when he's shaking his hand when your fastball was really leaving a mark, right?
Or is it therapeutic to do this?
I think what I think poetry allows us to do is to get closer to that experience, even if it's difficult and painful. And by doing that, it just made me more present to what I thought was an important thing for me to do, and just to sort of live through it with him. And then to write the poems just sort of kept him close to me and kept that experience present, even though it's still hard. And it's, like the few times I've done readings, it's like I'm a mess, like I do an interview and I'm like, I gotta apologize. It's hard to do it, but I think sometimes hard things are really what maybe, we need to spend more time with. There's a quote from the French writer Colette that I could throw at you that would make me sound smarter than I am. But, she's saying, look hard at, the things that like are easy to look at, but look even harder at the harder stuff. And I hold that close. Renee?
I know your mom, you've always been the fiction writer.
Yeah.
Can you talk about what it was like to make this transition to poetry, whether it was sudden or gradual, whether you realized it, at what point you decided to call it, okay, I'm doing poetry now?
Yeah, it's
Can you repeat the question? for Zoom?
the question from Renee is like, so I've always seen myself as a fiction writer. I did write that one book of nonfiction that sort of allowed me maybe to think of myself outside of that box a little bit. But it goes back to those words from Raymond Carver, make use of the world around you, pay attention. Mary Oliver talks about being astonished and tell about it and all those kind of juicy pearls. And so I just sort of was like, well, I want to tell the truth. Like fiction, I was tired of just lying and making things up. And I certainly didn't want to like make use of my father as a fiction. And I just wanted to sort of just write about like, it was almost no choice, if that makes it even, just like I started, one thing my father always did, and I was writing about it this morning, I'm still writing about it. I probably carry it with me, into the final river, as they say, the river at the end of the river, which is my new book of poems that I'm working on. But I started waking up at 5 a.m. to honor him because that's what he did, right? I remember as a kid, like waking up in the middle, what I thought was the middle of the night, and going out to the fridge and getting a whatever, whether or not I was tired from the late night prior. And my dad was up like 5 a.m. doing exercises. I don't exercise in the morning, but I do read. I begin my day at 5 a.m. with poems. And sometimes those poems speak to me in a way that invite me to speak back. And that's exactly what happened. And then I couldn't stop speaking, kind of like right now. So that's what happened. And it's like, I have no interest right now in writing fiction still. It's really, it's interesting. Like, and I'm like, oh, what am I going to write myself out of a gig? I think I was brought here to teach fiction, right? I've since sort of written a book of nonfiction. Hey, can you teach the nonfiction class? Sure. I say yes to almost everything, like when it comes to teaching, at least.
Because you can do everything.
Well, and that's one thing I would, tell to our young writers who are going to graduate school. Don't let them box you in to make a choice. Like I almost sent you a link today. I was reading an interview with Melissa, I think her name is Phoebos. I did a reading once in her reading series in New York a long time ago. She's now become like a really famous nonfiction writer, and she's at Iowa. And I was going to say, make sure you check her out, right? She's got like 3 really, important books about her experience, just sort of her lots of different experience. I won't go into detail because one of them was when she was a dominatrix in New York City for 3 years, and she wrote a book about it. Right? She made use of it. Now she's just writing about kind of body politics and things like that. But don't just think of yourself as a fiction writer. And I know you already write poems. Suzanne read that beautiful book, her chapbook of poems. She's got an equally beautiful novella that's born of words like porch and house and sister. That is fiction, right? And do both, and then write about other things too. So that's what happened, Renee, and in terms of that transition and just sort of looking forward. And who knows, maybe I'll write, I would like to maybe write a novel again or a book of fiction, but right now that part of my brain is sort of shut down.
Can we sort of extend that question?
Yeah.
James and Suzanne, because like I was struck as you guys were reading next to each other that like ostensibly, James, you're reading poetry or like a short story.
Yes.
Right. And Suzanne, you're reading poetry. And yet it was like it felt like they were in dialogue with each other, and partly because of the way that the language and the words take on importance, and in some ways almost a shared vocabulary. But the repetitive language really emphasizes the sound of, it's very poetic, and there's like a real story building up. So, as writers, how much do you think that? Do you feel like you try to pin yourself down or is that like an open concept? As you write and start writing, it was just sort of like taking the same question and running.
When you guys answer, could you stand in front of
What would you-
So-
or like, go for it.
Sure. Oh.
Oh, okay, there we go.
Okay. I'm always looking for the line that blurs between fiction and poetry. And it's part of the reason, to be honest, after I graduated OU, that I was kind of hesitant to get into to even apply to any MFA programs, is because a lot of them made you choose, and I just didn't know where I stood. And I didn't want to make the choice. And so I also, like I mentioned, I really love The Sound of the Fury. The first time, I think I was in Alison Powell's class, the first time I read Gertrude Stein, and I just, pardon my French, I love the way she fucked with language. I thought it was so cool that like you could communicate something without communicating anything at all. And so that's always a question I have. Like Peter can tell you, he's read, the novella in many, many different stages, but like language is always the beginning for me. Even in fiction, like in fiction, it's like, how poetic can I make this fiction? And then in poetry, I've written standalone poems as well, but they all seem to have this through line. They're related by kind of content, but also formatting, style, similar language. So I think I'm always looking for that hybrid thing. And I love language more than genre. So for me, what's really fun is language. And so like what I want to create is like throw words at a wall and see what sticks. And then I love to like mix them up. Like this chapbook was a lot of like literally cutting things up into pieces and kind of playing magnet tiles with them and seeing what new images came when I put things together that my brain wouldn't normally. So yeah, I guess long answer for a short question. I'm always thinking that.
Jeff's questions are always long.
But
they're great.
Yes. James?
Yeah, so I've dabbled in all three. I've written fiction, nonfiction, and poetry. And just out of that experience, I always find that my heart is very much in fiction. I wrote a book of nonfiction. I'm like, okay, this isn't good enough, obviously. And I wrote a book of poetry. I'm like, okay, this is also not good enough. I mean, it was decent, but it wasn't what I'm seeking. It wasn't what I was seeking in work and in making a piece of work. So I've always come back to fiction, and it just seems like that's where my heart is at. And at least for now, I suppose. I have ambitions for different books that I would like to write. Like I would love to write an epic poem because that seems pretty cool, right? But I don't know. You don't know what's gonna stick, and what's gonna work. But in terms of the content, I'm always looking at language, to use some of Peter's words, incantation and music and the acoustics, and Gordon Lish's concept of every phoneme counts, and and also of course finding the words that mean the most to you. I think it was Annie Dillard who had this concept of like, when you go to write, you lay out a line of words, and you take those words and you kind of let those words carry you. And also, to take a concept from Richard Hugo, he had this concept that truth should conform to music and not the other way around. So maybe by taking those words and following where those words take you acoustically, musically, you'll find the story and you'll find your meaning in that story. And sometimes it fails, but it's worth it. It's about that. So thank you.
Professor Braun.
Oh, stop.
It's like, I'm going to be out of a job one of these days, and it's gonna be-
Is that what you were talking like?
No.
Corey Dillard?
I think you had a question, or else it was your friend who made me laugh. Yeah.
Yeah, can we get maybe an anecdote recently, something you've heard from the kids
Yes. An anecdote from Inside Out. Trying to think. I mean, it's just it's a new day. It's a new river every. It's just like the kids come up with really funny things, and they're like, there's a lot third graders, I'm not making this up either. I had this kid. This is in East Dearborn, a bunch of Yemenis students. Well, there's a lot of stuff going on in the world, as we know, and it's in Yemen too. And these are all 100% Yemen immigrants. And this little, when I first walked into the classroom, these kids are sort of sizing me up. And this kid, Muhammad, kind of comes up to me in that like alpha male. He's like looking me up. He's like, I could tell he's like looking at my biceps, right? And he's like flexing on me. Seriously, little third grader. He's like, you work out? I mean, remember that meme or like whatever the video a few years ago, lift, do you lift, bro? It was sort of that. Like, he was like, do you work out? And I'm like, well, a little bit, And he goes, I do. And then I go, well, let me see, do a drop and give me 10. I used to coach hockey and baseball, so I'm used to that little like bravado sort of stuff between boys. So it's like, okay, Muhammad, drop and give me 10. He drops and gives me 10, gets up. I said, that's pretty good. And then he goes, let me feel your muscle. Right? And so I flex. He goes, oh, that's pretty good. He was impressed with my little scrawny arm. And then he's like, can you do that? And I dropped and gave him 10. And I immediately, they're like, ooh, this guy's real. I'm going to listen to him for at least a little while. And that lasted about a week. So yeah, just a lot of things like that. But these kids are incredible. And they grow up to be incredible college students. At least that's my hope for them. And they know I'm a professor here. Some of them sometimes will call me Professor Pete, so I go by Mr. Pete. And then I talk to them about, like when you're in college, and they read poems that I bring into 2100 too. And they probably know those poems or are able to see into those poems like the Red Wheelbarrow better than maybe 20-year-olds. No shade to you guys, but they see it as like a third grader told me, Mr. Pete, you ever notice how that poem, it looks like a wheelbarrow? Like there's a long line preceded by the one word line, like the wheel and then the barrow. It's like, whoa, you can't look at that poem the same way again. So I don't know, that's not that great of an anecdote, sorry.
I had a question. So obviously you wrote this book after your father passed.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering, like you're in so like I came back home from the vet, I set down the empty cat carrier and I opened up my laptop and wrote something. So I was wondering how much time passed between when your father passed and when you decided that you were going to write something about it. If it's like okay, he's gone, bring my typewriter. If it was, spend time.
I mean, I wrote a lot of the poems prior, just when he started getting really sick and was bed-stricken and couldn't do a lot of the things that I then started to do almost on his behalf, like going for long walks along the river, paying attention to the natural world. I was never I'm not a birder or anything like that. But I just sort of started to see the world a little bit differently when he started to get sick. And I just started to kind of look at the world, both the interior world and the exterior world a little closer, and paid attention and wrote about it and things like that. The tragedy too that hit me on both sides of my heart is my dog, who was my beloved dog that my dad walked every day up until he couldn't, died the week after my dad died. So I was bringing home my father's ashes like a week later from the place that you pick that stuff up from, and like passing the vet that I had just put so there's a poem in there that begins like, he misses his dog and his father equally, and that was true at the time. And it's like any death is a death. I don't care if it's a cat, right? And it's just, I mean, people might say, man, your dad was old, dude. He had a good life. Like, get over it, right? That doesn't resonate with me. Like, I still just, And I've heard other people talk about it when they lose old parents. It doesn't matter. You know, my grandparents lost their son when he was 12, right? In a train accident. Imagine that. You don't get over that, right? But you don't get over a lot of things, and writing maybe doesn't, it's not that it's cathartic or anything even. It's just sort of just something that I now do, and I think about it, you know, like I'm not scared of it either. That's the one thing. I'm not scared of death. Like it was beautiful, if that makes sense. And being so close to it. Maybe not with you and your cat, but with me and my dad, it was a beautiful act. Like my rest of my family, they were like, oh, it happened so fast. And there's a poem about that in this book too. I was like, what are you talking about? My mom kept him alive. But, you know, when he turned away from the window and stopped eating and curled up like a flower, like, okay, that was it. And I was ready. And that's the power of a poem. And you're all going to deal with that, man. Like, you know, like your dad's going to, like, you know, it's just, and it's okay. Write about it. That might be a good note to end on. I don't know. I mean, I don't want to like,
Go forth and write about
yeah,
it,
go
right?
home and like,
Yeah.
kill the Buddha and tell about it.
Yeah. Well, I think we should have one more round of applause for everyone for coming. There are books to be bought back there, and I'm sure Peter would be happy to sign them.
And I'm
You
serious
asked them
about
nicely.
free books. If you're
And-
interested, like, come unburden my backpack.
And we will have an in-person poetry bash on April 15th. So if you want to come and bring a favorite poem, we will see you there. Thank you again for coming.